My name is Elliot Foster, and at 29, I've always felt like a pawn in my parents' grand strategy. That evening, walking into their immaculate dining room 10 minutes late, I could already feel the tension. I'd barely settled into my seat when my father casually declared, "Natalie's moving into Elliot's apartment next week." Everyone nodded and chuckled as if it were a done deal. I stood up, rapped on the table, and announced, "Actually, I haven't lived there for weeks." I turned for the door, but my mother's voice stopped me cold. "Wait, where have you been staying all this time?" Before I continue, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see how my family reacted when they realized they'd lost control. Growing up a Foster meant adhering to a meticulously crafted life plan my parents had designed long before I could even voice an opinion. From my clothes to my extracurriculars, every choice was filtered through their vision of my success. My father, Richard, a corporate attorney with deep ties in Boston, and my mother, Diana, a hospital administrator, genuinely believed they knew what was best for me and my younger sister, Natalie. The fundamental issue was that their aspirations for me and my own desires were miles apart. I yearned to study photography in college. They insisted on business administration. My post-graduation dream was to travel. They arranged an internship at my father's friend's firm. Each time I tried to assert some independence, they'd remind me of their sacrifices. "We're only looking out for your future, Elliot," my mother would say, her voice carrying that specific tone that made disagreements seem both foolish and ungrateful. Natalie, on the other hand, was the golden child, for years my junior at 25. She had always embraced our parents' guidance, following their blueprint without a hitch. Prestigious private school, Ivy League education, and now a promising career in finance. While I chafed under their control, she seemed to flourish, collecting their approval like accolades. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the constant refrain of my adolescence and early adulthood. After graduating from Dartmouth with a business degree I never wanted, I found myself at Anderson and Blake Financial, another connection courtesy of my father. The pay was good, but a part of me withered daily, staring at spreadsheets that held no meaning. The apartment I supposedly lived in was another extension of their influence. When I turned 27, my parents helped me find a place in Beacon Hill, an upscale neighborhood that fit their desired image. Help meant they found it, approved it, made the down payment, and kept their names on the lease alongside mine. We split the rent, but the power dynamic was undeniable. It wasn't truly my space. "We're just giving you a head start," my father had said, handing me the keys. "Most people your age could never afford a place like this." He was right, of course. I couldn't afford it alone, which perfectly cemented the dependency they desired. Every piece of furniture, every appliance, even the artwork, reflected my mother's taste, not mine. It was a beautiful cage, a daily reminder that I was living someone else's life. The breaking point arrived 6 weeks ago. I had been secretly stashing away money for years. A portion of my salary funneled into an account my parents knew nothing about. I'd also been diligently building a photography portfolio, submitting to galleries and publications under a pseudonym to keep it from them. When a small but respected gallery in Cambridge offered to display my work, I knew it was time. I found a modest one-bedroom apartment in Jamaica Plain, a neighborhood my parents would undoubtedly deem beneath me. The building was older, the space smaller, but the rent was manageable on my own. I signed the lease without telling a soul, and over 2 weeks, I gradually moved my personal belongings, the things that truly mattered to me, into my new place. I continued going to work, attending family dinners, maintaining the charade that everything was normal. As far as my parents knew, I was still in the Beacon Hill apartment, still following their carefully orchestrated life plan. I kept up the illusion partly out of fear, partly out of strategy. I needed time to figure out how to tell them I was breaking free, and I needed to secure my independence before the inevitable confrontation. What I never anticipated was that they would make decisions about my apartment, an apartment I no longer lived in, without even consulting me. But then again, that had been the story of my entire life. That Sunday evening, I deliberately arrived late to my parents' biweekly family dinner. These gatherings had become increasingly stifling over the years, but skipping them entirely would raise too many questions. My strategy was to minimize my exposure, arrive after everyone was seated, leave before dessert, and keep conversations superficial in between. I parked my Honda Civic, a practical downgrade from the BMW my parents had tried to gift me last Christmas, a block away from their Tudor-style home in Brookline. The house I grew up in was impressive by any standard, 4 bedrooms, a manicured lawn, and an interior that looked straight out of Architectural Digest. As a child, I'd felt pride in our home. As an adult, I recognized it as another status symbol in my parents' collection. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the heavy front door without knocking, a small act of reclaiming ownership over my childhood home. The sounds of conversation and laughter drifted from the dining room, along with the aroma of my mother's signature pot roast. "There he is." My father's voice boomed as I entered. Richard Foster stood at the head of the table, crystal wineglass in hand, his grey hair perfectly coiffed despite it being Sunday evening. "We were beginning to think you weren't coming." "Traffic," I mumbled, though in reality, I'd been sitting in my car for 20 minutes, mentally preparing myself. Around the table sat the usual suspects. My mother, elegant in cashmere. My sister, Natalie, whose usually perfect appearance seemed slightly disheveled tonight. Uncle James and Aunt Patricia, my father's brother and his wife, and my cousins Mark and Jennifer. Everyone was dressed in that casually expensive way that defined my family's weekend attire. "Well, you're here now," my mother said, rising to retrieve another plate from the kitchen. "We've only just started." I took my assigned seat, always the same spot, to my mother's right, and accepted the loaded plate she handed me. Conversation resumed as if my entrance had been a mere blip. As I was saying, my aunt continued, addressing my mother, "The contractor simply refused to use the marble we selected. Can you imagine? After we had already approved the samples and everything." I tuned out, focusing instead on cutting my meat into unnecessarily small pieces. Years of these dinners had taught me that actual participation was optional, as long as I maintained the appearance of attention. "Elliot," my father's voice cut through my thoughts. "How are things at Anderson and Blake? Charles mentioned the Westfield account is causing some trouble." Charles Blake, my father's college roommate and the reason I had my job. Of course, they'd been discussing me. "Everything's fine," I replied, the standard answer that required no elaboration. My father frowned slightly. "Just fine." Charles seemed to think there were significant challenges with the portfolio diversification. "Nothing I can't handle," I said, stuffing a forkful of potatoes into my mouth to discourage further questioning. Across the table, I noticed Natalie staring at her wineglass, her food barely touched. This was unusual for my sister, who typically engaged enthusiastically in family conversations, especially those focused on work achievements. "Natalie, darling," my mother said, apparently noticing the same thing, "you've hardly eaten. Are you feeling well?" My sister looked up, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Mum, just not very hungry tonight." There was something in her expression that caught my attention, a weariness I recognized, because I saw it in my own mirror every morning. Before I could analyze it further, my uncle changed the subject to politics, launching the table into a discussion where everyone held identical views yet felt compelled to voice them as if they were being profound. As the main course plates were cleared and my mother disappeared into the kitchen to prepare coffee and dessert, I noticed my father and mother exchanging meaningful glances. They had perfected the art of silent communication over their 35 years of marriage, and I had learned to be wary of those looks. They preceded announcements, decisions that had already been made but were about to be presented as if open for discussion. My suspicion grew when my father cleared his throat, his universal signal for attention. The table fell quiet as everyone turned toward him expectantly. I gripped my water glass, sensing that whatever was coming would somehow impact me. "Well, now that we're all together," my father began, his tone casual but his words clearly rehearsed. "Diana and I wanted to share some family news." I watched Natalie's posture stiffen slightly. Whatever this news was, she already knew. "Our Natalie has had a bit of a difficult time lately," he continued, placing a hand on my sister's shoulder. "As some of you know, she and David have decided to end their relationship." This was news to me. Natalie and David had been together for nearly 3 years, and last I heard, they were discussing moving in together. I looked at my sister with genuine concern, but her eyes remained fixed on the tablecloth. "These things happen," my mother added, returning with a tray of coffee cups. "And while it's unfortunate, we believe everything happens for a reason." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes at this platitude, instead watching the subtle dynamic playing out between my parents and sister. There was something rehearsed about all of this, like a play where I hadn't been given the script. "The timing is actually rather convenient," my father continued, his voice taking on that particular tone he used when presenting one of his brilliant solutions. "Natalie's lease is up at the end of the month, and rather than rushing to find a new place on her own, we've come up with the perfect arrangement. I felt a knot form in my stomach, a premonition of what was coming next. Natalie will be moving into Elliot's apartment next week, he announced as if declaring the weather would be sunny tomorrow. It makes perfect sense. That 2-bedroom in Beacon Hill is far too spacious for just one person, and this way Natalie can take some time to regroup without the stress of apartment hunting. Around the table, heads nodded in agreement. My aunt immediately chimed in, "That's a wonderful solution," while my uncle added, "Very practical." My cousin smiled approvingly, and even Natalie managed a small, unconvincing nod. The entire scene felt surreal. My family casually deciding what would happen in my living space without anyone so much as glancing in my direction for input. The irony, of course, was that the apartment they were so generously offering to my sister had been sitting empty for weeks. The rent was still being paid, half from my account on autopayment, half from my parents, but I hadn't slept there since early February. The furniture remained, the utilities stayed on, but the closets were half empty, the bathroom devoid of toiletries, the refrigerator containing nothing but condiments. As my family continued to discuss the logistics of Nat's move as if everything was settled, I felt something shift inside me. 6 weeks of living my secret double life, of finally experiencing true independence, had changed something fundamental in my relationship with my family. Sitting there, watching them plan my life without me, I realized I was done pretending. "She can use your guest room, of course," my mother was saying, "and we thought this weekend would be perfect for the move since you mentioned having that company retreat next Saturday. That way we can help her get settled without disturbing you." My father nodded in agreement. "I've already contacted the building manager to add Natalie to the lease. Just a formality, really, since our names are already on it, and I can help with the decorating," Aunt Patricia offered, turning to Natalie. "That second bedroom has always been rather sterile. We could add some color, make it more feminine." Every word they spoke pushed me closer to the edge. The guest room they were discussing had already been emptied of the expensive and unused exercise equipment my parents had installed, and was currently filled with nothing but dust. The building manager they'd contacted would soon be reporting that one of the tenants had essentially disappeared. The lease they so casually mentioned modifying was a document I had been planning to remove myself from at the earliest opportunity. I looked around the table at my family. These people who claimed to love me yet didn't know the first thing about who I really was or what I wanted. Even Natalie, who appeared uncomfortable with the arrangement, wasn't objecting on the grounds that I should have a say, but rather seemed concerned about imposing on me. "It'll just be temporary," she said softly, the first words she'd spoken during this entire conversation. "Just until I find my own place." That was the final straw. The assumption that I would simply accept this decision, that my sister was doing me a favor by promising her invasion of my space would be temporary. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. The sudden movement caused conversations to halt mid-sentence as all eyes turned to me in surprise. "Elliot," my mother's voice carried a warning. Standing during a meal was considered rude in the Foster household, one of the many unspoken rules I had been expected to follow without question. I placed both palms flat on the table, leaning forward slightly as I looked around at each family member. The silence stretched uncomfortably as they waited for me to speak. "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I haven't been living in that apartment for 6 weeks." The declaration hung in the air for several seconds before anyone reacted. My father was the first to respond, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "Of course you live there. We spoke on the phone last week and you were at the apartment." "No," I corrected him. "You called my cell and I never said where I was. You assumed I was at the apartment." My mother's face had gone pale. "Elliot, if this is some kind of joke, it's not a joke. I moved out in February. I've been living somewhere else, paying my own rent, making my own decisions." The table erupted into confused exclamations. My aunt and uncle exchanged alarmed glances while my cousin stared openly, clearly enjoying the unexpected drama. Natalie's eyes had widened, her gaze finally lifting to meet mine with what looked like a mixture of shock and something else. "Respect, perhaps." "That's impossible," my father insisted, his authoritative voice attempting to bend reality to his will as it had so often in the past. "We would have known, would you?" I challenged. "When was the last time any of you actually visited me? When was the last time you asked what I wanted instead of telling me?" My mother rose from her chair now, her composed facade cracking slightly. "Elliot, I don't understand. Where have you been living? Why would you leave such a beautiful apartment without telling anyone?" Because it was never my apartment, I replied. It was another box you put me in, another decision you made for me. I turned away from the table, suddenly needing air, needing escape from the suffocating weight of their expectations and assumptions. I headed toward the foyer, grabbing my jacket from the coat rack. You can't just walk out in the middle of dinner. My father called after me, his voice rising. We need to discuss this like adults. I paused at the dining room doorway, turning back to face my family one last time. That's the problem, Dad. You don't want to discuss anything. You want to dictate, and you want me to comply. I'm done with that. As I turned toward the front door, my mother's voice stopped me cold. Wait, she said, her tone carrying genuine confusion and concern. Where have you been living all this time? I froze with my hand on the door, suddenly unsure. In all my planning, in all my imagined scenarios of how I would eventually tell my family about my new life, I had never decided how much I would reveal. My new apartment was mine, truly mine, in a way nothing in my life had ever been before. The thought of my parents knowing where it was, potentially showing up unannounced, potentially criticizing and attempting to improve it, made me hesitate. That doesn't matter right now, I finally answered without turning around. What matters is that for the first time in my life, I made a decision for myself, and it's been the best decision I've ever made. With that, I pulled open the door, and stepped out into the cool evening air, ignoring the chorus of voices calling my name behind me. I made it halfway down the stone path leading from my parents' front door to the street when I heard the door open again behind me. I quickened my pace, digging in my pocket for my car keys, not ready for whatever confrontation was about to occur. Elliot, wait. It was Natalie's voice, not my parents'. I slowed but didn't stop completely. I don't want to talk right now, Nat. I called over my shoulder. Please, she said, and something in her tone, a desperation I wasn't accustomed to hearing from my seemingly perfect sister, made me pause. I turned to find her hurrying down the path toward me, no jacket despite the March chill, her arms wrapped around herself. Behind her I could see my parents standing in the doorway, watching but not following. They were giving Natalie a chance to bring me back before they intervened themselves. 5 minutes, I conceded when she reached me. That's all I can handle right now. We walked to the sidewalk together, stopping beside my car. In the glow of the street lamp, I could see more clearly what I had only glimpsed at dinner, the subtle signs that my sister wasn't as put together as she usually appeared. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hair, typically styled to perfection, looked like it hadn't been washed in a couple of days. Is it true? She asked. You really moved out weeks ago and didn't tell anyone? I nodded, leaning against my car. Yep. Why? And how? I mean, where are you living? One question at a time, I said, running a hand through my hair. Why? Because I needed to live my own life for once. How I saved enough for a deposit and first month's rent, signed a lease, and moved my stuff little by little so no one would notice. We're a place in Jamaica Plain. Natalie's eyes widened at the mention of my new neighborhood, Jamaica Plain. But that's so ... So what? Not up to foster family standards, I challenged. She had the grace to look embarrassed. I didn't mean it like that. It's just a big change from Beacon Hill. That was the point. A moment of awkward silence stretched between us. Behind Natalie, I could see my parents still watching from the doorway, their patience visibly waning. Look, I said, you don't have to worry about the apartment. If you need a place to stay, it's sitting empty. I'm still paying my half of the rent until I figure out how to get my name off the lease. Natalie shook her head, wrapping her arms tighter around herself as a gust of wind blew down the street. It's not about the apartment, Elliot. Well, not entirely. Then what is it about? She looked down at the sidewalk, then back up at me with unexpected vulnerability in her eyes. David didn't just break up with me. He left me for my best friend, and they'd been seeing each other behind my back for months. Everyone at work knows. I had to get a transfer to another department because I couldn't stand the pitying looks. Her voice cracked slightly. I'm living with Mom and Dad right now because I couldn't afford my rent after David moved out. I'm drowning in student loans. I hate my job, and I feel like my entire life is falling apart. I stared at my sister, genuinely shocked. This wasn't the Natalie I thought I knew, the golden child who sailed through life collecting achievements and approval. This was someone I'd never seen before, vulnerable, struggling, and frightened. I didn't know, I said quietly. I'm sorry about David. That's really messed up. She gave a short, bitter laugh. Yeah, well, it turns out the perfect life everyone thinks I have is just as much of an illusion as yours apparently was. Before I could respond, the sound of the front door closing forcefully caught our attention. My parents were making their way down the path toward us. My father's face set in the determined expression he wore when closing difficult negotiations. "Great," I muttered. "The cavalry arrives. Elliot James Foster," my father began as they approached, using my full name as he had whenever I was in serious trouble as a child. "You cannot drop a bombshell like that and simply walk out. We are going to discuss this like a family." "There's nothing to discuss," I replied, straightening up from my car. "I made a decision about my own life. I don't need your approval or permission." "Of course you don't need our permission," my mother interjected, her tone softening in the way it did when she was trying to be the reasonable one. "But we're your parents. We worry about you. How could you move without telling us? What if something had happened to you?" "I'm 29 years old. Mum, people my age move all the time without providing their parents with forwarding addresses." "Not in this family," my father stated firmly. "We've always been open with each other about important decisions." I couldn't help but laugh at that. Open? When have any of you ever been open to what I want? When have you ever actually listened to me instead of telling me what to do, what to study, where to work, where to live? "We've only ever wanted what's best for you," my mother insisted. "No," I corrected her, feeling years of resentment finally bubbling to the surface. "You've only ever wanted what you think is best for me. There's a difference." My father's face darkened. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. By sneaking around, lying to us, throwing away opportunities that other people would kill for." I didn't ask for those opportunities. I didn't ask for that apartment or that job, or any of it. All I've ever wanted was the chance to make my own choices, even if they're the wrong ones. "And what choices have you made, exactly?" my father demanded. "Moving to some rundown neighborhood." "Doing what with your life?" Richard, my mother cautioned, placing a hand on his arm. The neighbors could undoubtedly hear us now. I took a deep breath, trying to regain my composure. "I'm still working at Anderson and Blake, if that's what you're worried about. I haven't thrown away my career. I've just created some space for myself where I can figure out what I actually want." "And what about your sister?" my mother asked, gesturing to Natalie, who was standing awkwardly to the side. "She needs your help right now." "Family helps family. Elliot, don't drag me into this," Natalie said suddenly, surprising all of us. "I'm not going to be used as emotional leverage." My mother looked shocked. "Natalie, no one is using you as leverage. We're simply trying to help you through a difficult time by making decisions about where I'll live without consulting me or Elliot," Natalie challenged. "That's not helping, Mom. That's controlling." I stared at my sister in astonishment. In all our years growing up together, I had never heard her openly disagree with our parents like this. My father's expression shifted from anger to confusion as he looked between us. For perhaps the first time in my memory, he seemed at a loss for words. "Look," I said, seizing the moment, "I need some time. I need space to figure things out on my own terms. I'm not cutting you off, but I am setting boundaries." "Boundaries?" My father repeated the word as if it were foreign to him. "Since when do families need boundaries?" "Since always," I replied. "You just never let us have any." The four of us stood there on the sidewalk, the night growing colder around us. Decades of family dynamics shifting beneath our feet, like tectonic plates. I could see my parents struggling to process what was happening, to understand how they had lost control of the narrative so completely. "I should go," I said finally, pulling my car keys from my pocket. "We can talk more when everyone's calmer." "Elliot," my mother began, her voice taking on the wounded tone that had so often guilted me into compliance in the past. "Please don't leave like this. Come back inside. We can work this out." For a moment, I felt the familiar pull, the desire to keep the peace, to avoid disappointing them, to fall back into old patterns. But then I thought of my small apartment across town, with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in my own photographs. I thought of the freedom I'd felt these past 6 weeks, making my own decisions without seeking anyone's approval. "Not tonight," I said firmly. "I'll call tomorrow." I unlocked my car door and looked at Natalie. "If you want to talk more about everything, call me. We can meet up somewhere." She nodded, giving me a small, sad smile. "I'd like that." With a final glance at my parents, my father's face set in stone, my mother's eyes filling with tears, I got into my car and drove away, watching them shrink in my rearview mirror, until I turned the corner and they disappeared from view. The drive back to Jamaica Plain gave me time to process what had just happened. As I navigated the familiar streets of Boston, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: liberation at having finally stood up to my parents, guilt at the hurt I'd seen in my mother's eyes, and surprise at Natalie's unexpected support. By the time I pulled into the small parking lot behind my apartment building, my hands had stopped shaking, but my mind was still racing. The 3-story brick building was nothing special from the outside. No doorman, no fancy lobby, just a secure entrance and stairs that creaked slightly as I made my way up to the 3rd floor. I unlocked the door to apartment 3C and stepped inside, immediately feeling the tension in my shoulders ease. This place, modest as it was, had become my sanctuary over the past 6 weeks. The apartment was small, a combined living room and kitchen, a bedroom just big enough for a queen-sized bed, and a bathroom with temperamental plumbing, but every inch of it was mine, filled with things I had chosen. The walls, once bare white, now displayed my photography landscapes, urban scenes, and portraits I had taken over the years. The furniture was a mix of second-hand pieces I'd found at thrift stores and a few items I brought from the Beacon Hill apartment that actually belonged to me. I kicked off my shoes and collapsed onto the worn but comfortable sofa I bought from a couple moving to Chicago. The difference between this place and the sleek, magazine-perfect apartment in Beacon Hill couldn't have been more stark. That place had never felt like home despite its expensive furnishings and perfect location. This place, with all its flaws and limitations, felt more like me than anywhere I'd lived since leaving for college. Pulling out my phone, I saw 6 missed calls, 3 from my mother, 2 from my father, and 1 from Natalie. There were also several text messages, which I scrolled through with a growing sense of exhaustion. Mum, Elliot, please call us. We're worried about you, Dad. This conversation isn't over. Call me first thing tomorrow. Mum, at least let us know you got home safely. Natalie, I'm sorry about tonight. Can we talk tomorrow? Just us. I sent a quick text to my mother. I'm home safe. Talk tomorrow. And then one to Natalie. Sure. Coffee at Pavement on Center at 1 p.m. Her response came almost immediately. I'll be there. Tossing my phone aside, I walked to the refrigerator and pulled out a beer, then moved to the window that overlooked the street below. The neighborhood was alive even at this hour. People walking dogs, couples returning from dinner, music drifting from the bar on the corner. It was so different from the sterile quiet of Beacon Hill after dark. How had I ended up here, living this double life? The decision hadn't been made in a single moment, but had built gradually over years of suppressed desires and quiet resentments. I thought back to the day I signed the lease for this apartment. I had been shaking so badly that the leasing agent had asked if I was feeling well. It wasn't illness, but fear. Fear of defying my parents, fear of failing on my own, fear of discovering that perhaps they were right about me after all. Yet underneath that fear had been exhilaration, a sense of finally taking control of my own story. The first night I'd slept here, on a mattress on the floor before my bed frame was delivered. I'd lain awake until dawn, alternating between panic and profound relief. Each day after that had gotten a little easier. Each decision I made without consulting my parents a small victory. I had continued going to work at Anderson and Blake, still wearing the suits my mother had selected, still performing the tasks expected of me, but evenings and weekends had become mine in a way they never had been before. I joined a photography group that met weekly at a local coffee shop. I'd started exploring parts of Boston I'd never visited, despite living here my entire life. I'd even gone on a few dates with people I met through the photography group, something I would never have done before, knowing my parents would inevitably want to vet anyone I was interested in. The secret apartment had been just the beginning. I had been planning my exit from Anderson and Blake as well, quietly building a photography portfolio and reaching out to contacts in the field. Last week I'd been offered a position as an assistant to a well-established commercial photographer, a significant pay cut from my financial analyst position, but a foot in the door to the career I actually wanted. I hadn't accepted the offer yet, partly because I was working up the courage, partly because I was figuring out if I could afford it. My savings would cover the gap for a while, but eventually I would need to make the lower salary work. It would mean budgeting carefully, giving up certain luxuries, possibly even finding a roommate when my current lease ended. These were the kinds of practical concerns my parents had always shielded me from, or prevented me from experiencing, depending on how you looked at it. For the first time in my life, I was facing real financial constraints and having to make trade-offs. The strange thing was, despite the stress, it felt good. It felt real in a way my previous life never had. As I stood at the window sipping my beer, my phone buzzed with another text. I expected it to be from my parents, but instead, it was from my cousin Mark. Dude, epic dinner exit. Families in chaos. Uncle Richard looks like he's about to have an aneurysm worth missing dessert. I couldn't help but smile. Mark had always been the family member most likely to appreciate my small rebellions, though he had never attempted any of his own. Definitely worth it, I texted. Back 30 years overdue. Setting my phone to Do Not Disturb, I moved away from the window and pulled out the folder, where I kept the information about the photography assistant position. As I reviewed the details again, I found myself feeling more certain than I had before tonight's confrontation. Something about finally standing up to my parents, about seeing the shock on their faces when they realized they didn't know everything about my life, had strengthened my resolve. I had spent so many years allowing them to chart my course, to make my decisions, to define my success. The apartment in Jamaica Plain was just the beginning. If I was truly going to build a life that belonged to me, I needed to be willing to disappoint them even more than I already had. The thought of telling my father I was leaving a prestigious financial firm to become a photographer's assistant made my stomach clench with anxiety. I could already hear his dismissive comments, see my mother's worried frown, but I could also remember the feeling I'd had earlier tonight, standing my ground on that sidewalk, finally speaking my truth after years of silent compliance. Freedom, it turned out, was terrifying, but it was also intoxicating. Tomorrow I would meet Natalie and hear what she had to say. I would eventually have to face my parents again and navigate whatever new dynamic was emerging between us. But tonight, in this small apartment that represented my first real act of independence, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't experienced in a very long time: pride in my own choices, regardless of anyone else's approval. Pavement Coffee House on Center Street was bustling with Sunday afternoon activity when I arrived shortly before 1. I found a small table in the corner and ordered a black coffee, nervously checking my phone every few minutes. After the emotional upheaval of last night, I wasn't entirely sure Natalie would show up. At 5 minutes past 1, just as I was considering texting her, the door opened and my sister walked in. She looked more put together than she had the night before, hair neatly styled, makeup carefully applied, but I could still see the signs of strain around her eyes. She spotted me and made her way through the crowded cafe. "Sorry I'm late," she said, setting her designer purse on the empty chair between us. "Mom and Dad were giving me the third degree about where I was going." "Did you tell them you were meeting me?" I asked as she removed her coat. "No," she admitted. "I said I was meeting a friend from work." I felt like I needed neutral territory for this conversation. I nodded, understanding completely. "Do you want something to drink? The lavender latte is surprisingly good. Just an Americano, thanks." I got up to place her order, giving us both a moment to collect our thoughts. When I returned with her coffee, Natalie was staring out the window, her expression distant. "So," I said, sliding back into my seat. "Last night was intense." She turned back to me with a small, sad smile. "That's one way to put it. After you left, it was like a bomb had gone off." Mom cried, Dad paced and ranted, and the rest of the family made awkward excuses to leave as quickly as possible. "I'm sorry you had to deal with the fallout." She shrugged. "It wasn't your fault. Actually, it was refreshing in a weird way. I'd never seen them so completely thrown off balance." We sipped our coffees in silence for a moment, the ambient noise of the cafe creating a bubble of privacy around our table. "I meant what I told you last night," Natalie finally said, "about David and work, and feeling like everything's falling apart. I haven't been honest with anyone about how bad things have gotten, not even Mom and Dad, especially not Mom and Dad." She stirred her coffee absently. "They've always seen me as the successful one, the one who has everything figured out. I couldn't bear to disappoint them." The irony wasn't lost on me. "So, while I was pretending to still live in that apartment, you were pretending your life was perfect." Pretty much. She met my eyes directly. "We're more alike than I thought." I leaned back in my chair, truly looking at my sister for perhaps the first time in years. Growing up, I had always seen Natalie as an extension of our parents, their perfect creation, their willing subject. It had never occurred to me that she might be struggling with her own version of the same pressures I had faced. "Why did you move out?" she asked. Really, I considered the question carefully, because I needed to know who I am without their influence, because I was suffocating under the weight of their expectations, because every decision I've ever made has been shaped by what they wanted, not what I wanted. "And what do you want?" "To be a photographer," I said, the words coming easily now that I had said them aloud to myself so many times. "I've been offered an assistant position with Martin Reeves." Natalie's eyebrows rose. "The commercial photographer, the one who shoots for all those major brands?" I nodded. "It's entry level and the pay is terrible compared to what I make now, but it's what I've always wanted to do." "Have you accepted it?" "Not yet. I'm still working up the courage." She smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. That's amazing, Elliot. I had no idea you were into photography. There's a lot we don't know about each other, I said. We've been living as the people our parents wanted us to be for so long that we never really got to know who we actually are. Natalie looked down at her coffee cup. I hate finance, she said quietly. I've always hated it. I chose it because Dad said it was a good field for someone with my analytical skills. And Mum said the stability would be important when I had children someday. What would you have chosen instead? She hesitated, as if sharing a deeply held secret. Education. I wanted to teach elementary school. I couldn't hide my surprise. Really, you never mentioned that, because I knew what they would say, that it doesn't pay enough, that I'd be wasting my potential, that anyone can be a teacher. She sighed. So I never even brought it up. I just went along with their plan, like I always have. Until now, I suggested. She met my gaze, determination slowly replacing the resignation in her eyes. Maybe seeing you just walk away last night, stand up to them like that. It made me wonder if I could do the same. You can, I assured her. It's terrifying, but also incredible. Would you show me? She asked suddenly. Your new place. I mean, I want to see where you've been living. The request surprised me, but I found myself nodding. Sure, if you want. It's nothing fancy, not like what you're used to. That's exactly why I wanted to see it. 20 minutes later, we climbed the creaky stairs to my third floor apartment. I felt a strange nervousness as I unlocked the door. This was the first time I had invited anyone from my family into this space that represented my independence. Natalie stepped inside and looked around slowly, taking in the modest dimensions, the mismatched furniture, the photographs on the walls. I waited for the judgment, the polite but dismissive comments our mother might have made. Instead, she walked to the wall where my largest prints were displayed, a series of black and white urban landscapes showing parts of Boston rarely featured in postcards. These are yours? She asked, examining a photograph of an elderly man playing chess in the park. Yeah, I admitted. I've been taking pictures since college, but I never showed anyone in the family. They're beautiful, she said, and I could hear the genuine appreciation in her voice. You're really talented, Elliot, she continued, exploring the apartment, running her fingers along the second-hand bookshelf, peering into the small but functional kitchen, glancing into the bedroom, with its simple furnishings. It's so you, she finally said, turning back to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I know that sounds weird since I apparently don't know you very well, but this place feels right. It feels honest. That's exactly why I love it. I told her. It's not perfect or impressive, it's just mine. Natalie sank onto my sofa, looking suddenly overwhelmed. I don't even know what mine would look like. I've never had anything that wasn't chosen or approved by them. I sat beside her. It takes time. I'm still figuring it out myself. How did you do it? She asked. Practically. I mean, finding this place, moving out, keeping it secret. I explained the process. The secret savings account. The careful research into neighborhoods I could actually afford. The gradual moving of possessions so no one would notice. The hardest part wasn't the logistics, I admitted. It was fighting. The voice in my head that sounded exactly like Dad, telling me I was making a huge mistake, that I couldn't handle things on my own, that I needed their guidance. Natalie nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. That voice never goes away, does it? It gets quieter, I assured her. Every time I make a decision for myself and the world doesn't end, it loses a little of its power. We sat in silence for a moment, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor of my apartment. I don't want to move into that Beacon Hill place, Natalie finally said. I never did. It was Mum and Dad's solution, not mine. What do you want? I asked, echoing her earlier question to me. She took a deep breath. I want to get out from under their control like you did. I want to figure out who I am when I'm not being the perfect daughter. She hesitated, then continued with growing conviction. I want to quit my job and apply to education programs for the fall semester. I couldn't help but smile at the determination in her voice. Then that's what you should do. It won't be easy, she said. They'll fight it even harder than they're fighting your independence. You were always the rebel. They almost expect this from you. But me, I'm supposed to be the good one, the one who validates all their parenting decisions. You don't have to do it alone, I told her. We can present a united front. She looked at me with surprise. You'd do that? After all these years of me being their perfect child while you got all the criticism? I shrugged. We were both just playing the roles we were given, but we don't have to anymore. She nodded, a new resolve settling over her features. So, what do we do now? Call a family meeting, write a manifesto, run away and change our names. I laughed. Maybe something a little less dramatic. How about we start by being honest with them, and with each other? Honesty, she repeated the word as if testing it out. That would certainly be a change for this family. It's time, I said. We're adults. We get to decide who we want to be and how we want to live. They won't like it, but they'll have to accept it eventually, or not, Natalie added pragmatically. We have to be prepared for that possibility, too. She was right. Of course, there was no guarantee our parents would ever truly accept our choices, or respect our independence. The thought was painful, but also clarifying. Our lives couldn't be contingent on their approval any longer. We'll figure it out, I said with more confidence than I actually felt. Together, Natalie smiled, a genuine smile that reminded me of when we were children, before expectations and competition had come between us. Together, she agreed. Starting tomorrow, the following Saturday, Natalie and I stood side by side on our parents' front porch, both of us fighting the urge to turn around and leave before ringing the bell. We could still back out, Natalie murmured, smoothing her skirt nervously. Pretend this past week never happened. Go back to our assigned roles. I shook my head. No turning back now. Besides, you already gave notice at your job. Hard to unring that bell, she grimaced. Don't remind me. I still can't believe I did that. I'm proud of you, I told her, and meant it. In the days following our coffee shop conversation, Natalie had shown a determination I had never seen in her before. She had resigned from her position at the investment firm, researched education programs at local universities, and even looked at apartments she might be able to afford on her savings until she started school in the fall. I had made some bold moves of my own, accepting the photography assistant position and giving notice at Anderson and Blake. The weight that had lifted from my shoulders when I submitted my resignation had been worth the anxiety of the decision itself. Ready? I asked, my finger hovering over the doorbell. Natalie took a deep breath and nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. I pressed the bell, and we both instinctively stood up straighter as we waited. After a moment, our mother opened the door, her expression shifting from polite greeting to cautious relief when she saw us. Elliot, Natalie, she said, stepping back to let us in. Your father and I were beginning to think you might not come. The past week had been a strange limbo in our family dynamics. After the explosive dinner, I had called my parents as promised, but kept the conversation brief and Natalie, still living at their house but suddenly asserting unprecedented independence, had been engaging in what she described as strategic avoidance. Today's lunch, requested by Natalie and me specifically to discuss important matters, was the first time we would all be in the same room since the revelation of my secret apartment. Our father was waiting in the living room, standing by the fireplace in what we used to call his boardroom pose, feet planted firmly, hands clasped behind his back. He nodded stiffly as we entered. Son, he said to me, then more warmly, to my sister, Natalie. The four of us took seats in the formal living room, my parents on the sofa, Natalie and I in armchairs facing them. The setup felt intentionally like a negotiation, which in many ways it was. Before you begin whatever speech you've prepared, my father said, raising a hand preemptively, your mother and I have something to say. I exchanged a surprised glance. With Natalie, this wasn't how we had expected the conversation to start. We've been doing a lot of thinking this week, my mother continued, her hands nervously twisting the pearl necklace she wore. About you both, about our family, about certain patterns that may have developed over the years. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. What your mother is trying to say is that we've realized we may have been overly involved in your lives, particularly yours, Elliot. I blinked in surprise. Of all the scenarios I had imagined for this conversation, my father admitting any kind of fault had not been among them. We've always wanted the best for both of you, my mother added quickly. Everything we've done has been out of love and concern for your futures. We know that, Natalie said, her voice gentler than I could have managed. But good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes. My father's posture stiffened slightly at what could be interpreted as criticism, but he nodded nonetheless. Your Aunt Patricia suggested we might benefit from some reading on what did she call it, Diana? Healthy family boundaries, my mother replied, looking as if the phrase tasted strange on her tongue. Apparently, it's quite common for parents of adult children to struggle with this transition. I was momentarily speechless. The idea of my parents reading self-help books on boundaries was so far outside my conception of reality that I didn't know how to respond. Natalie recovered more quickly. That's really great to hear, because healthy boundaries are exactly what Elliot and I wanted to talk about today. We assumed as much, my father said dryly. Given recent events, we've made some decisions, I said, finding my voice at last. Important ones about our lives and futures. We're not here to ask for permission or approval. We're here to inform you of these decisions as adults speaking to adults. My mother's expression tightened with anxiety, but she nodded. We're listening. Over the next hour, Natalie and I laid out our plans. My career change, her decision to pursue education, our mutual desire for genuine independence. We explained our frustrations with the family dynamic that had existed for so long, the ways in which their control, however well-intentioned, had prevented us from developing our own identities and making our own choices. My father listened with uncharacteristic silence, his expression impossible to read. My mother asked occasional questions, her concern evident, but her usual attempts to problem-solve noticeably restrained. When we had finished, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. I braced myself for the arguments, the dismissals, the attempts to talk us out of our decisions that I had expected all along. Finally, my father spoke. I won't pretend to be happy about all of this, he said carefully, particularly your career change, Elliot. I think you're making a mistake that you may regret when you're struggling to pay your bills on a photographer's salary. I opened my mouth to defend my choice, but he held up a hand. However, he continued, I'm beginning to understand that you need to make your own mistakes. Both of you do, and perhaps they won't be mistakes at all. Perhaps they'll be the right choices for you, even if they're not the choices we would have made. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not exactly acceptance, but an opening, a possibility that hadn't existed before. We would like to help you, my mother added, leaning forward, not control you, but support you. There's a difference, though I'll admit we haven't always recognized it. Natalie and I exchanged skeptical glances. What kind of support are you talking about? She asked cautiously. Financial, if you need it, my father said. Advice, when you ask for it. A safety net, should things not work out as you hope. But no strings attached, no expectations. That's generous, I said slowly, searching for the catch. But I'm not sure either of us is comfortable accepting financial help right now. It's too easy to slip back into old patterns. My father nodded, looking slightly disappointed but not surprised. The offer stands whenever you're ready. In the meantime, perhaps we could start with something simpler. Like what? Natalie asked. Like dinner, my mother suggested. Once a month instead of every other week. No extended family, no pressure, just the four of us getting to know each other as the adults we all are. It was such a reasonable suggestion, so unlike the emotionally charged ultimatums I had expected, that I found myself nodding before I had fully considered it. I think we could manage that, I said, looking to Natalie for confirmation. As long as we're clear that it's just dinner, she agreed. Not a chance for subtle manipulation or guilt trips about our choices. My father winced slightly at her bluntness, but nodded. That seems fair. The conversation turned to more practical matters: Natalie's plans to move out of their house, my new job starting date, the logistics of removing my name from the Beacon Hill apartment lease. To my surprise, my parents remained relatively neutral, offering suggestions when asked, but largely allowing us to outline our own solutions. As the discussion wound down, my mother disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a bottle of champagne and 4 glasses. I thought we might toast to new beginnings, she said, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. If that's not too presumptuous. Natalie and I accepted the glasses she offered, and our father did the honors of popping the cork and pouring the champagne. To new beginnings, he said, raising his glass, and to getting to know each other all over again. We clinked glasses. The ritual familiar, but the sentiment behind it entirely new. As I sipped the champagne, I realized that this was perhaps the most adult interaction I had ever had with my parents. Not perfect, not without tension, but founded on a grudging mutual respect that had never existed before. Later, as Natalie and I walked to our cars, she bumped her shoulder against mine. That went nothing like I expected. Me neither, I admitted. I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maybe it won't, she said thoughtfully. Or maybe it will, and we'll deal with it when it happens. The point is, we're not waiting for their approval anymore. We're moving forward regardless. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of hope and caution. 1 month at a time, 1 dinner at a time, 1 decision at a time. Exactly. She hugged me before getting into her car. See you Wednesday to look at those apartments. I'll be there, I promised. As I drove back to Jamaica Plain, to the small apartment that had started this whole chain of events, I thought about the long road ahead. Rebuilding relationships with my parents would take time and patience from all of us. Building my new career would mean starting at the bottom, working harder than I ever had for less compensation than I was used to. Finding my authentic self after so many years of living according to others' expectations would be a continuing process, not a destination. None of it would be easy, but for the first time in my life, the path I was on was one I had chosen for myself. The uncertainty of the future felt not like a threat, but like possibility, open and unwritten. In my apartment, I looked at the photographs on my walls, images I had created from my own vision, my own perspective on the world. One day soon, other people would see these images in galleries or publications. One day soon, Natalie would be standing in front of a classroom full of children, sharing her own gifts in her own way. One day soon, perhaps, our parents would truly understand the people we had become, separate from the people they had tried to shape us into. Until then, we would keep moving forward, making our own decisions, living our own lives, not in opposition to our family, but in addition to it, finding the balance between independence and connection that had eluded us for so long. Has your family ever tried to make decisions for you without your input? Have you ever had to stand up for your independence? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this story, and share it with someone who might need encouragement to follow their own path. Remember, it's never too late to set boundaries and reclaim your life. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.